A big week expected next week when it comes to litigation against Illinois gun laws. Good morning, I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. We've got the federal cases up in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. You also have in state court, not just everybody waiting for whatever the Illinois Supreme Court's going to do with Dan Calkins' case, but in Sangamon County, you have a case challenging Illinois' firearm owner identification card that's expected to be heard on Tuesday. So all of that happening next week, and we'll see, of course, where all of this goes. But it's a big week next week when it comes to movement in various cases. Good morning, I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Programming notes, I am taking tomorrow off, so just be cognizant of that. You won't see a live stream, and you'll likely hear on WMAY a rebroadcast of various best of segments. But just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. But next week, of course, after earlier this month, you had the state and local governments who have gun and magazine bans in place being challenged in federal court. They filed their briefs, and this is all in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, lumping in cases from the Southern District, where there were 4 cases brought by plaintiffs' groups, all consolidated, and Judge Stephen McGlynn issued a preliminary injunction in that case where they ultimately are, the state had to refrain from enforcing the law, but the state went and got that stayed in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. So those Southern District cases are lumped in with Northern District cases where a judge in the Northern District, in 2 different cases, sided with the state and local governments with their bans. So you've got this ongoing hearing that's going to be happening June 29th, but on Monday, the plaintiffs' groups are set to provide their briefs. And just to kind of, again, review some of what the plaintiffs' groups had to say, or the state defendants had to say, they ultimately are arguing that semi-automatic firearms like AR-15s are built to be more lethal. And I imagine that a lot of people are going to say, yeah, well, of course, that's why people have firearms, is to protect themselves with lethal measures. Love to hear from you at 217-629-7970. That's the phone number. You can always chime in live and local. But the states filing that brief and the local governments filing their briefs, ultimately saying that, they have the right to ban dangerous and unusual weapons, that the AR-15s are not commonly owned for law-abiding purposes. They say criminals use these. They say that the firearms are built for maximum lethality, and this is, again, why they need to be able to regulate these things. So the states had their say in briefs in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. On Monday, you'll have all of the plaintiffs' groups filing their briefs challenging the gun laws, challenging the bans on semi-automatic weapons and magazines over certain capacities. So we'll bring you the latest there. But another side story on all of that is down back in the Southern District of Illinois, you've got Thomas Magg, who was the first to file that case in Crawford County State Court that was transferred to federal court. Even though his case is lumped in with the 3 other cases from the Southern District that are lumped in with the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals cases, Magg went back to Judge Stephen McGlynn in the Southern District and asked for a partial summary judgment on the case, dealing with one particular issue, saying that the law is unconstitutionally vague. So that's still at play as well back in the Southern District. And one thing to keep in mind here, and again, I'm not an attorney, but just having observed this and seen this as well play out during the challenge of COVID-19 mandates, the preliminary injunction that was issued in the Southern District, that was just one facet of the case. It didn't deal with the overall questions of the case. And what was appealed to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals was the preliminary injunction, which is a temporary measure. It's like a temporary restraining order. They're temporary, and they could, be overturned or upheld while the the crux of the case is ultimately deliberated in court. So in the Seventh Circuit right now, they're just dealing with that preliminary injunction. Yes, they're also going to be dealing with the Second Amendment questions and whatnot, but back in the Southern District, Thomas Magg is asking for a narrow judgment on the what he claims is the law being unconstitutionally vague. So you've got those things moving around. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, we'll see what the plaintiffs' groups have to say come Monday evening at some time. I imagine they have until Monday, close of business, to file. And then Tuesday in Sangamon County Court, you've got a case challenging the firearm owner identification card, which Illinoisans who are gun owners, you have to have a FOID card in order to buy or own firearms or ammunition. And you have to, this is one of like 4 different states that has a similar type of scheme here, requiring individuals to have a identification separate from like a driver's license or a state ID. Now, this is managed by Illinois State Police, and you have to have this thing updated and so on. But the challenge, of course, is that it's unconstitutional to require somebody to have an ID, a firearm owner identification card in order to exercise their Second Amendment right. And we'll see exactly what happens with that case on Tuesday. So some big things happening when it comes to challenges of Illinois gun laws next week. We'll be watching and bringing the latest here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Coming back, we'll talk about some actions that are happening in Congress when it comes to firearms. But I also wanted to share this story with you. Earlier this week, the Chicago Tribune reported that a judge has announced that Gary, Indiana can start getting gun sale records. This apparently is a case that's been going on for years. The city of Chicago sued a gun store, alleging that it sold hundreds of guns that would wind up in the hands of gang members. Gary, they filed a lawsuit in 1999. This all deals with West Fourth Sports. Gun manufacturers also say that this is all a fishing expedition. But you've got a motion being rejected to quash subpoenas in this case. And the lawsuit contending that major manufacturers, including Smith & Wesson, Colt, Beretta, and local gun dealers should be held accountable as a public nuisance for supplying guns that they know will reach criminals and others who legally can't buy them. The city's lawyers have long said that West Fourth effectively was a high-volume gun trafficker by selling weapons to straw purchasers that wound up in violent street crimes. So you're looking at an interesting development here when it comes to gun stores and whether or not a government can demand records to track these gun sales. And of course, here in Illinois, we've got the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. That is a extra layer of licensing the state does on top of the federal firearms licensees that they have to get from the federal government, and that allows for inspections of all kinds of documents. So all of this in the space of firearms, Second Amendment rights, and how it interplays with the concerns people have about firearms being used to commit violence and murder and gang activity and so on. So I wanted to definitely get that story in here as well. Stay tuned. We'll come back and hear from both sides about the U.S. House essentially saying the Biden administration cannot just create rules to ban things. So we'll get to the latest in the pistol brace conversation up next here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bill. A couple of weeks ago, a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction against the ATF's pistol brace rule. And then we had the story of the compliance rates being absolutely abysmal. I want to say, it was anywhere from, 0.2% to maybe 8% compliance rate. I think they only had like 220 some odd thousand people actually register by the deadline the ATF gave. While you had the speculation that there could have been 20 to 40 million different pistol braces out there. So with that continuing on in the federal courts, you've got members of Congress in the U.S. House that are moving to essentially block the government from creating these types of rules. Here's House Democrat Vice Chair Ted Lieu talking about Republicans wanting to essentially strip the federal agency from crafting rules that some argue violates Second Amendment rights.
And what are Republicans focused on? Chaos. We haven't voted for about a week because the Republicans lost control of the House floor. And what you're going to see today is one change. In their rule, they put in essentially a bill for reversing regulations on stabilizing braces for guns that will make guns more lethal. So we had all this chaos, the floor is shut down, and what the radical Republicans extracted was a bill for a rule that's going to now make guns more lethal. And they're doing this during National Gun Prevention Month. They're doing this during the week of the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. That's where your radical Republicans are.
So Ted Lieu calling it radical to essentially say, federal government, you can't just craft rules and have those rules violate Second Amendment rights. So let's hear from Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky. He sounded off on this on the House floor. We're not going to get all of his speech, but we'll at least hear a good chunk of it. Here's what Thomas Massie had to say about this particular situation.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I find it ironic that the gentleman on the other side of the aisle is demanding to know what the power sharing structure is here in the House, when in fact he'll spend the rest of his time arguing that we should give our power to the White House, that the administrative branch should be making law. In fact, major regulations that have more than $100 million of impact. So I would say to the gentleman on the other side of the aisle that if he's wondering about the power sharing arrangement, then he should seek to put some power here in the House, restore the power that the founders gave us in Article 1 of the Constitution. And with respect to the solution to the tragic school shootings, some states have taken it upon themselves to allow qualified teachers and staff to carry firearms. Imagine that. They're protected. The children are protected by firearms the same way we're protected here. Why do we sit here and say, oh, we got to do something, and when we sit behind protection and the children aren't? I would encourage the other side of the aisle to co-sponsor my bill to change the default setting here in this country. And the default setting was set by the Gun-Free School Zone Act, which makes it illegal to even be near a school and have a firearm, which makes it harder for states to set policies that would save our children. And all it does is make felons of law-abiding gun owners. So I would encourage them to look at a real solution, because you can ban a pistol brace. You're not going to stop a single mass public shooting. Most of these mass public shootings occur with a pistol, not with a pistol with a brace on it, or not with a short-barreled rifle, as they would say, or not with a rifle, an assault rifle they might call it. So they can start banning these pieces of plastic like the Biden administration is doing, and then they could move on to banning magazines, or they could do, as the ranking member of Judiciary admitted to me last night, he'd like to ban all the AR-15s.
So again, Thomas Massie on the House floor before the House passed that bill to nullify the ATF pistol brace rule, and he went on for several more minutes to talk about that. But interesting to see that happen. It's not going to go anywhere in the U.S. Senate, but still, another measure that's being considered here is banning the IRS from buying guns with taxpayer funds. That's a measure coming from Senator Joni Ernst out of Iowa, and that was announced earlier this week, impacting the Internal Revenue Service. So just some things happening over in Washington, D.C. when it comes to firearms, the Second Amendment, and trying to curb executive authority to ultimately hinder what some say are Second Amendment rights by crafting administrative rules. So that's something for you to chew on this morning. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on WMAY. It's